I found the group chat by accident. That was the part I kept replaying afterward. Not because the messages existed. Because for one brief second before I opened them, my family still felt normal. Sandra had come over for dinner on a rainy Tuesday evening. Nothing unusual. Soup simmering on the stove. Television murmuring softly in the living room. The kind of quiet, ordinary evening that used to feel comforting after Richard died. We were actually laughing. That was what hurt most later. Because right before everything shattered, I genuinely believed things between us were getting better. Sandra left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she helped me carry dishes to the table. Then the screen lit up. Just one vibration, one notification. Normally, I never would have looked. But the preview appeared large enough to read automatically when I walked past. Mama's bad days, Michael. She repeated the grocery store story again tonight. The world seemed to narrow instantly around those words. Mama's bad days, not family updates, not checking on mom. Bad days. I stopped walking immediately. The kitchen suddenly felt too bright, too quiet. My eyes locked onto the glowing screen while cold spread slowly through my chest. Then another message appeared. Claire, she sounded sharper yesterday though. Sharper, always sharper, not happier, not rested, sharp. Every conversation quietly translated into cognitive evaluation again. I should have looked away. I know that. But once you see something like that attached to yourself, some terrible part of you needs to know how deep it goes. I picked up the phone slowly. The group chat opened automatically. Sandra. Michael, Claire, and months of messages, pages and pages. I stared at the screen while nausea rolled slowly through my body. March 14, she forgot Ethan already started baseball again. March 22, voice sounded confused after nap. April 3, repeated the pharmacy story twice. Repeated, confused, sharp. The same clinical language everywhere. Not emotional observations. Not ordinary family conversation. Monitoring. Then another message stopped me completely. Michael, I think the bad days are getting closer together. Closer together. Interesting phrase, not stress, not grief, progression. Fear had quietly transformed ordinary human imperfection into measurable decline again. My hands started shaking. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. These conversations happened while I still believed family dinners were normal. While I laughed, cooked, talked, the evaluations continued invisibly underneath everything. Then another message appeared farther down. Sandra, don't correct her too much tonight. She gets embarrassed. The room tilted slightly around me. Correct her. I suddenly remembered dozens of strange moments differently. Michael exchanging glances with Sandra after I repeated something. Claire gently changing subjects whenever I forgot a detail. Everyone becoming strangely patient at the same time. At the time I thought they were being kind. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No, they were managing me. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. 3 weeks earlier, Sandra casually saying, "Today seems like a really good day." Good day, not nice evening, not happy mood. Good cognitive performance. Every ordinary interaction suddenly rearranged itself differently. Not connection. Assessment. I scrolled farther, and then I found the message that hollowed me completely. Sandra, she asked where Richard's blue sweater was again. I think she forgot we donated it. I stared at the sentence while tears blurred the screen. Richard's sweater. God help me. I remembered that moment perfectly now. Not confusion, not memory loss. Grief. I asked because sometimes part of me still expected to see his things where they always used to be. That was what made everything so cruel. Every emotional moment after losing my husband quietly became possible evidence against my mind. Then another message appeared beneath it. Claire, that one scared me honestly. Scared, always scared. Never controlling, never humiliating, scared. I suddenly realized something terrifying. My grief had become frightening to people. Not because I was dangerous. Because fear had quietly convinced my children that sadness itself might be early decline. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. How long? The words escaped my mouth aloud before I realized Sandra had re-entered the kitchen. She froze instantly, not confusion, terror, real terror. Her eyes locked onto the phone in my hands. Too late. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Then softly, "Mom," I looked directly at her. "How long have you all been discussing my bad days?" The kitchen stayed completely silent, except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Because somewhere deep down, both of us suddenly understood the same devastating thing. The group chat was never really about sharing concern. It was a running record of my humanity being quietly evaluated behind my back by the people I trusted most. Sandra crossed the kitchen slowly like someone approaching broken glass. "Please give me the phone." No, I suddenly recognized the tone. The same careful tone people use around unstable patients. That hurt more than anger would have. I tightened my grip slightly. "How long?" Sandra wiped at her eyes quickly. "It started after the snowstorm. Always the snowstorm. One wrong highway exit during dangerous, whether quietly becoming the emotional foundation beneath every monitoring system afterward." I looked back down at the glowing messages. Months. Entire months of observations. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. Every family dinner I thought was normal, every phone call, every holiday, had secretly contained parallel conversations happening afterward. Private evaluations, cognitive summaries, fear reports. I scrolled farther despite myself. "Michael, she keeps forgetting to buy enough groceries lately." "Claire, I think she's hiding confusion better now." Hiding confusion better. The sentence hollowed me completely, because suddenly I understood something terrifying. Every calm moment, every ordinary conversation, every improvement was still filtered through suspicion. I looked directly at Sandra. "You think I'm pretending to function?" "No," too fast, too sharp. The silence afterward answered everything anyway, then another message caught my eye. "Sandra, don't mention Dad too much tonight. It makes her disoriented afterward." Disoriented again, not emotional, not grieving, symptom language. Fear had quietly translated mourning itself into cognitive instability. I stared at the screen while nausea rolled slowly through my body. Then another realization surfaced painfully. "For months," I whispered, "you all discussed me after I left rooms." Sandra covered her mouth instantly, not defensive, not careful, ashamed. Because finally she understood the actual violation underneath everything. Not concern, narrative control. I suddenly remembered countless strange moments differently. The way conversations sometimes stopped briefly when I walked back into rooms. Michael texting during dinner. Claire watching me too carefully after emotional stories. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now every memory felt contaminated. Then another message stopped me cold. "Michael, today definitely felt more like one of her bad days." Bad days. Not difficult days, not sad days, bad. The language itself stripped humanity away. I looked toward Sandra slowly. "What exactly makes a day bad?" she cried softly immediately. "We were just trying to understand patterns." Patterns again, always patterns. Tiny ordinary imperfections collected emotionally until they resemble inevitability. I laughed softly, brokenly. So grief became data. The kitchen stayed completely still. Because spoken aloud, fear finally sounded visible again. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. "How many times did you all talk about me while I slept?" Sandra lowered her eyes instantly. Cold spread slowly through my chest. Not once, not occasionally. Enough. Enough to make silence meaningful. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Last month, waking from a nap to find 3 missed calls and a text from Claire asking, "You okay?" "You sounded strange earlier." At the time I thought she worried naturally. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No, the group chat had probably escalated concern already. Everything suddenly rearranged itself into systems. Then another message appeared farther down. "Claire, she asked the same question twice at lunch." Sandra, did she seem aware she repeated it? Aware she repeated it. I stared at the words while something inside me quietly cracked. Not because I repeated a question. Because people I loved had started discussing my awareness of myself like clinicians reviewing symptoms. Then another realization surfaced slowly. For months, I whispered, I thought maybe I really was getting worse. Sandra looked up sharply. What? You always seemed one step ahead of every mistake I made. The tears filled her eyes instantly, because finally she understood the deepest wound underneath everything. Not the group chat itself. Self-doubt. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches older adults to question themselves before questioning the people observing them. Then another memory surfaced. Richard repeating the same fishing story every Thanksgiving for 15 years. Everyone laughed affectionately. No one opened secret group chats afterward. Because middle-aged repetition feels charming, elderly repetition becomes evidence. That was the cruel difference. I kept scrolling mechanically now. June 4, she forgot the restaurant name again. June 9, she sounded more alert tonight. Alert again, always alert, like nurses discussing recovery. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. You all rated me emotionally every day. Sandra shook her head immediately. That's not fair. No, my voice cracked sharply now. There's literally a group chat called Mom's Bad Days. The room went completely silent. Because spoken aloud, the cruelty finally sounded impossible to soften. Then Sandra whispered something that nearly broke me. The first time you forgot where Dad's sweater went, her voice shook. I thought maybe we were starting to lose you. There it was finally. The real terror underneath everything. Not memory. Loss. Fear of watching one parent disappear through death and becoming terrified the other might disappear differently afterward. That was what made forgiveness possible eventually. Not easy, but possible. I looked back down at the glowing screen one final time. Hundreds of messages, hundreds of observations. So much fear hidden beneath ordinary family interactions. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. The most painful part of growing older is not making ordinary mistakes. It is realizing how quickly the people who love you begin quietly discussing those mistakes like evidence. Once fear convinces them, they might already be slowly losing you. I asked for the phone password after that, not calmly either. If there's a group chat about my bad days, I want to read all of it. Sandra hesitated immediately. That hesitation frightened me more than the messages themselves. Because suddenly, I realized the chat no longer emotionally belonged to ordinary family conversation. It belonged to fear. Mom, no. My voice shook sharply now. I'm done being discussed like I'm not in the room. The kitchen stayed completely still, except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Finally, Sandra whispered the password. My hands trembled slightly entering it. Then the full history opened. Months, pages and pages. The oldest messages dated back only 2 weeks after Richard's funeral. That realization hollowed me completely. Not after obvious decline, not after diagnosis, immediately after grief. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. My morning itself had become the beginning of surveillance. I scrolled farther upward. Sandra, she left the TV on all night. Michael, probably exhaustion. Claire, still scared me. Scared again, always scared, never controlling, never humiliating, scared. Every ordinary human moment quietly transformed into emotional evidence because grief had shattered everyone's sense of proportion. Then another message stopped me completely. Sandra, she keeps talking about hearing Dad's footsteps upstairs. The room tilted slightly around me. God help me. I remembered that conversation, not hallucinations, not confusion, grief. Sometimes after 40 years of marriage, silence plays tricks on you. I looked down farther. Michael, that's actually common after losing a spouse. Sandra, I know, but it still worries me. Worries me. Interesting phrase, not hurts me emotionally, not makes me sad, worries. Fear constantly overriding empathy. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. 3 months earlier, Sandra casually asking, do the evenings feel strange sometimes? At the time I thought she meant loneliness. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No. She was screening for cognitive symptoms. Every ordinary conversation suddenly rearranged itself differently again. Not connection. Assessment. Then another message appeared. Claire, she repeated the same memory about Dad twice tonight. Michael, did she realize? Did she realize? I stared at the screen while tears blurred the words. That was the sentence that broke something inside me completely. Not because I repeated myself, because my awareness of repetition had become a discussion topic. I suddenly felt exposed in a way I could barely describe, not because I was imperfect, because imperfection was now monitored collectively. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. How many times did all of you leave family dinners and immediately discuss me afterward? Sandra stayed silent, too silent. Cold spread slowly through my chest. Every holiday, every Sunday meal. Every ordinary conversation, followed by debriefings. Then another memory surfaced. Last Easter, excusing myself to the bathroom after crying unexpectedly over Richard's empty chair. At the time I thought everyone was respectfully giving me space. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No, there was probably a conversation afterward. Sandra, she's declining emotionally faster lately. Claire, I noticed too. Emotionally faster, not grieving harder, not struggling more, declining. Fear had quietly transformed sorrow itself into evidence again. I sat slowly at the kitchen table because suddenly my legs felt weak. Then another horrifying message appeared farther down. Michael, maybe we should stop correcting her when she forgets details. It only upsets her. Correcting her. The sentence hollowed me completely. I stared toward Sandra slowly. For months, you all corrected me behind my back. We were trying to help. Help, always help. Never humiliating, never invasive. Help. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Sandra gently changing subjects whenever I mixed up dates recently. At the time I thought she was being thoughtful. Now everything rearranged itself differently. Not kindness. Management. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. I became a project. Sandra covered her mouth instantly, not defensive, not managerial, destroyed, because finally she understood too. The group chat had not simply shared concern, it slowly transformed me into collaborative observation. Then another message stopped me cold. Claire, good day today. She seemed almost like herself again. Almost like herself. I stared at the words for several long seconds while something inside me quietly cracked open. Almost like herself. Meaning somewhere inside my children's minds, there now existed multiple versions of me being constantly compared against one another. Stable today. Confused tomorrow. Sharp this morning. Bad tonight. I whispered aloud into the silent kitchen. I was always myself. The tears finally slipped fully down Sandra's face then, because finally she understood the deepest wound underneath everything. Not the messages themselves. Conditional identity. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches families to experience older adults like fluctuating versions of themselves instead of complete human beings. Then another memory surfaced. Richard forgetting names constantly after 55. Everyone laughed affectionately. No secret discussions. No symptom comparisons, because middle-aged forgetfulness feels human. Elderly forgetfulness becomes predictive. That was the cruel difference. I closed the phone slowly and placed it onto the kitchen table between us. Tiny device, hundreds of messages. So much fear hidden beneath ordinary family love, then quietly admitted something for the first time. For months, I started monitoring myself too. Sandra looked up immediately. What? Stories. Names, repetition. My voice cracked slightly now. Every time I forgot something small, I wondered whether it would end up in your group chat. The kitchen stayed completely still. Because finally the real damage sat clearly between us. Not observation, psychological conditioning. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches older adults to experience ordinary humanity like possible evidence against themselves. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. The most painful part of growing older is not that people worry when you make mistakes. It is realizing how quickly the people who love you stop simply living beside those mistakes. and start quietly comparing notes about them afterward. That night, after Sandra left, I could not stop rereading the messages, not because I wanted to hurt myself. Because once people begin secretly narrating your life behind your back, some terrible part of you needs to know the full version. The house stayed silent around me while rain moved softly against the windows. Just me, the phone, hundreds of observations. June 11, she sounded more confused after waking up. June 14, good dinner tonight, hardly repeated herself. Hardly repeated herself. Interesting phrase, not enjoyed dinner, not laughed with us. Performance metrics. I stared at the words while cold spread slowly through my chest. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. Every family gathering now existed in two versions. The one I experienced emotionally, and the one they summarized afterward clinically. That was the true betrayal, not hidden concern, hidden interpretation. Then another message stopped me completely. Michael, maybe we should stop discussing it around Ethan. He notices too much. I froze instantly. Ethan, my grandson. Cold spread painfully through my body. I scrolled farther. Claire, he asked why Grandma repeats stories sometimes. Sandra, I told him everyone gets forgetful when they get older. Forgetful when they get older. Not grieving, not human. Aging itself quietly translated into expected decline again. Then another message appeared beneath it. Michael, he asked if she's getting like Grandpa before he died. The room tilted slightly around me. Grandpa, Richard's father, Alzheimer's. I closed my eyes briefly because suddenly I understood something horrifying. My grandchildren had already been emotionally prepared to interpret me through the possibility of dementia. Not because of diagnosis, because of fear. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Ethan watching me carefully after I forgot the name of his soccer coach last month. At the time I thought he was distracted. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No, he was checking. Children absorb fear faster than adults realize. Then another message stopped me cold. Sandra, please don't let Mom know we talk about this. She gets defensive. Defensive, interesting word, not hurt, not humiliated, defensive. Resistance itself quietly reframed as suspicious behavior again. That was the trap. I suddenly understood why so many older adults stop fighting these narratives eventually. Because every protest risks sounding like further evidence. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. For months, I whispered into the empty living room, everyone has been watching me together. The words sounded unbearable aloud, not individually worrying, collectively monitoring. I suddenly remembered Claire interrupting me gently during dinner 2 weeks earlier. Actually, Grandma, I think that happened last Christmas, not Thanksgiving. At the time, I laughed it off. Now everything rearranged itself differently. Not conversation correction, data point adjustment. Then another message appeared. Michael, she handled herself really well at dinner tonight. Handled herself well. I stared at the sentence while something inside me quietly broke. Not enjoyed herself. Not looked happy. Handled herself. Like I was completing tasks successfully instead of participating in my own family. Then another realization surfaced slowly. I no longer knew which moments with my children were genuine and which were quietly observational. That uncertainty poisoned everything. Then another memory surfaced. Last Sunday, Sandra smiling warmly while I told an old story about Richard. At the time I thought she looked emotional. God help me. Maybe she was relieved I remembered details correctly. I suddenly felt physically sick. Then another message stopped me completely. Claire, she seems more like herself in the mornings lately. More like herself. Again, that phrase. I stared at it for several long seconds while tears blurred the screen. More like herself. Meaning my identity itself had become conditional inside their minds. Stable version. Confused version. Good days, bad days. I whispered softly into the quiet room. I was always here. The tears finally came then, not loud crying, exhausted crying. Because suddenly, I understood the deepest wound underneath everything. The group chat had quietly trained my children to experience my humanity through fluctuation instead of continuity. Then another realization surfaced painfully, and eventually, it trained me too. I remembered standing in the grocery store last month, forgetting one ingredient briefly, and immediately panicking internally. Not because forgetting milk mattered. Because somewhere deep down, I already feared becoming tomorrow's group chat discussion. That was the real tragedy. Not monitoring, internalized surveillance. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches older adults to observe themselves through other people's anxiety. Then another memory surfaced. Richard repeating the same war story at every family barbecue for 20 years. Everyone smiled affectionately. No secret chats afterward. No cognitive analysis. Because middle-aged repetition feels nostalgic, elderly repetition becomes predictive. That was the cruel difference. I stared at the glowing screen one final time. Hundreds of messages. Hundreds of fears. Hundreds of tiny observations transformed into emotional evidence. Then quietly admitted something devastating to myself for the first time. Part of why the group chat hurt so deeply was because some small, frightened part of me had already started believing it too. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. The most painful part of growing older is not that people quietly discuss your mistakes. It is realizing how quickly those discussions start changing the way you see yourself. Once fear convinces everyone you might already be slowly disappearing. The next Sunday, everyone came for dinner like usual. Sandra, Michael, Claire, Ethan, normal family evening, at least from the outside. But once you discover people secretly discuss your bad days afterward, nothing ever feels fully ordinary again. Every glance suddenly means something. Every pause feels measurable. That was the damage, not the group chat itself, the permanent awareness of invisible evaluation. I spent all afternoon cooking carefully, too carefully, checking ingredients repeatedly. Repeating names silently in my head while setting the table. Mentally rehearsing stories before speaking, not because I needed help. Because I had started monitoring myself through everyone else's fear. That realization frightened me more than the messages ever did. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Richard burning an entire pie one Thanksgiving because he forgot the oven timer. Everyone laughed for years about it. No secret evaluations, no symptom discussions. Because middle-aged mistakes become family stories, elderly mistakes become warning signs, that was the cruel difference underneath everything. Dinner started quietly, too quietly. Everyone seemed nervous now. Careful, always careful lately. Ethan talked about school while Sandra watched me too closely whenever I answered questions. Not intentionally, perhaps. But checking had become instinct. Then I noticed something else. Every time I paused briefly searching for a word, someone jumped in immediately to help finish the sentence. Not conversation. Management, I set my fork down slowly. You can stop doing that. The room went completely still. Michael blinked. Doing what? Finishing my thoughts before I finish them myself. Silence. Too much silence. Then Claire whispered softly, "We're just trying to help." Help again, always help. Never humiliating, never diminishing, help. I looked around the table slowly. My own family has a secret group chat tracking my mistakes. No one moved. Because spoken aloud, the reality finally sounded impossible to soften. Then another horrifying realization surfaced. Even now, everyone at this table was probably wondering whether bringing up the chat itself counted as a bad day. The thought made me physically ill. I stared directly at Sandra. "Are you evaluating me right now?" Her face crumpled instantly, because finally she understood the deepest violation underneath everything. I no longer trusted the emotional reality of ordinary conversation. Then Ethan quietly asked, "What's a bad day?" The room froze, completely. Sandra's face drained instantly. Michael looked away. Claire closed her eyes briefly. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. The fear had already spread downward into another generation. Children always notice more than adults think. I looked gently toward Ethan. "Who told you that phrase?" Silence. Then softly, "I heard Mom say it." Mom. Sandra covered her mouth immediately, not defensive, not managerial, ashamed. Then Ethan whispered something that hollowed me completely. Mom says some days you remember things better. There it was, perfectly simple, perfectly devastating. My grandson had already learned to categorize my humanity into fluctuating levels of functioning, not because of diagnosis, because fear had quietly rewritten the way my family described me. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Last Christmas, Ethan watching me carefully after I forgot his friend's name briefly. At the time, I thought he was distracted. Now my stomach tightened painfully. No, he had already been taught what forgetfulness supposedly meant. Then another horrifying realization surfaced slowly. For months, I whispered, all of you have been teaching each other how to see me. The room stayed completely still, because there it was, the deepest wound underneath everything, not concern. Collective reinterpretation. Fear had quietly transformed me from a grieving wife into an ongoing family discussion topic about decline. Then Sandra quietly admitted something that nearly broke me. The first time Ethan noticed you repeated a story, her voice cracked slightly. I panicked. Panic again, always panic, never perspective, never proportion, panic. I stared toward Richard's empty chair near the end of the table. Then another realization surfaced painfully. After losing him, every ordinary mistake suddenly carried catastrophic emotional weight for my children, not because the mistakes were severe. Because grief had already convinced them loss could happen slowly next time instead of all at once. That was what made everything so tragic. Then Claire whispered softly, "We thought talking together would help us stay calm." Stay calm, there it was finally, the real purpose of the group chat, not understanding me better. Regulating fear. Every message reassured my children they were monitoring closely enough to prevent another devastating surprise. And somewhere inside that process, I slowly stopped being experienced as a whole person and became collaborative evidence management. Then another memory surfaced. Richard forgetting movie endings constantly after 50. Everyone teased him affectionately. No secret chat summaries afterward, because middle-aged forgetfulness feels lovable. Elderly forgetfulness becomes emotionally threatening. That was the cruel difference. I looked slowly around the table. My children, my grandson, dinner still warm beneath the lights, a family. Yet somehow fear had quietly inserted itself between every conversation. Then I quietly admitted something for the first time. I became afraid of talking freely around all of you. Sandra's tears slipped instantly down her face, because finally she understood the actual damage underneath everything, not observation. Performance anxiety. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches older adults to experience ordinary family conversation like an invisible test they might fail. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. The most painful part of growing older is not that people notice your mistakes. It is realizing how quickly those mistakes stop being private human moments once fear convinces everyone they should be discussed, compared, and interpreted together afterward. The group chat disappeared 3 days later. Sandra deleted it, at least officially. She came over that afternoon and showed me herself. No more messages. No more bad days. No more quiet evaluations scrolling endlessly beneath ordinary family life. She placed the phone gently on the kitchen table between us. It's gone. I stared at the blank screen for several long seconds, then quietly asked, "Is it really?" Sandra's face changed instantly, because finally she understood something too. Deleting the chat could not erase what the chat had already taught everyone. That was the tragedy. Observation had become habit now. The messages were gone. The lens remained. I stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen window while rain tapped softly against the glass again. Always rain lately. Then another realization surfaced painfully. For months now, every ordinary mistake had quietly carried invisible emotional consequences. Repeat a story, someone reports it later. Forget a detail, someone compares it to last week. Pause too long searching for a word, someone wonders privately whether it means decline. Fear had quietly transformed normal human imperfection into communal evidence. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Richard forgetting neighbors' names constantly after 55. Everyone laughed affectionately. No family meetings, no secret systems. Because middle-aged forgetfulness feels temporary, elderly forgetfulness becomes predictive. That was the cruel difference underneath everything. Sandra stood silently behind me, no clipboard. No notes, no monitoring calendar, yet I still felt observed somehow. That was the real damage, not the systems themselves, internalized awareness. Fear repeated long enough eventually teaches older adults to experience their own humanity, like ongoing performance. Then Sandra whispered softly, "I don't know how to stop worrying now." There it was finally, perfect honesty, not certainty, not control, fear, raw fear. I turned toward her slowly. "You know what frightened me most?" She shook her head weakly. "That part of me started worrying too." The tears filled her eyes immediately. Because finally she understood the deepest wound underneath everything. Not surveillance, contamination. Fear had quietly spread into me too. I remembered standing in the grocery store last month, forgetting one item, and immediately panicking internally. Not because forgetting milk mattered. Because somewhere deep down, I already imagined becoming someone people discussed afterward. That was the tragedy. Not aging. Self-conscious existence. Then another realization surfaced slowly. "For months," I whispered, "I stopped telling stories naturally." Sandra looked up immediately. "What?" "I rehearsed them first in my head." The room stayed completely still. "Why?" "So nobody would think I was repeating myself." The tears slipped fully down her face then, because finally she understood the actual damage underneath everything, not hidden chats. Behavioral shrinking. Fear repeated often enough eventually teaches older adults to edit their own personalities to avoid becoming evidence. Then, another memory surfaced. Richard telling the same fishing story every summer for 20 years. Everyone interrupted the punchline before he finished because they knew it by heart. He loved that. It made him feel known. Not evaluated, that was the difference. I sat slowly at the kitchen table. Sandra joined me quietly. No systems now, no secret notifications, just silence, human silence. Then Sandra whispered something that nearly broke my heart. "After Dad died, every little mistake suddenly terrified me." There it was, the real origin underneath everything, not control, grief. One parent disappearing suddenly had quietly trained my children to scan obsessively for signs of losing the other. That did not erase the damage, but finally, it explained its shape. Then another realization surfaced slowly. The group chat wasn't really about me, was it? Sandra blinked through tears. "What? It was about making all of you feel less helpless." The room stayed completely still, because finally the truth sat clearly between us. The messages regulated anxiety. Every observation reassured my children. They were paying close enough attention to prevent another devastating surprise someday. And somewhere inside that process, I slowly stopped being experienced as a whole human being living normally in the present. I became possibility, risk, future tragedy under observation. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. The first night after Richard died, when Sandra slept on my couch because neither of us could bear being alone. At the time, we simply cried together. No systems. No evaluations, just grief. God help me. Maybe everything afterward started because nobody ever truly recovered from that night. Sandra wiped tears from her face shakily. "I'm sorry." There it was again. Recognition, not procedure, not protection, recognition. I looked toward Richard's photograph glowing softly in the hallway light. Then quietly asked, "Do you know what I miss most?" Sandra shook her head softly. "Being allowed to forget things normally." The sentence settled heavily through the quiet kitchen. Because there it was, the deepest wound underneath everything. The quiet loss of ordinary humanity, forgetting names, repeating stories, losing thoughts halfway through sentences. Human things. Not evidence. I suddenly realized something devastating. The most painful part of growing older is not that people notice your mistakes. It is realizing how quickly fear can quietly transform those mistakes into collaborative proof of future disappearance. Once the people who love you become terrified, they might already be slowly losing you.